Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and welcome back to another history summarized by OverlySarcasticProductions, the great Ziggurat of Ur. So I've heard of that before. I think it's a temple of some sort, though I'm not entirely sure. Realistically, the only time I've ever really had any interaction with something called a ziggurat was in Civilization, which is it? What civilization made it? Right, Samarians. It was the Samarians in Civ 5. It gave science and culture. And I think it gave you extra culture if it was next to a river. And then it's same thing, only you can increase the culture by a research or something. I'm forgetting at this point. It's been a while since I played the Samarians. Again, I don't actually know that much about what the ziggurat is. Again, I think it has something to do with like religion or something, though I might be very wrong with that. If it was doing religion, you'd think they'd have something to do with like faith production in Civilization. Hey, well, never mind. Anyway, as always, link to the original is in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Video in the corner tab will be linking to my newest Hearts of Iron 4 playthrough with my friend Kothot and you. It is a mega campaign that we've been playing since Crusader Kings 2, and I think we're starting to get to the end of it. So hopefully you could join us and watch that if you're at all like inclined to do that. So with that all out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
How does a culture interact with its gods? This is a deceptively simple question that has sparked thousands of philosophies, firestorms, and a fair few holy wars over the millennia.
Yeah.
The answer is not consistent between or even within
His
cultures,
fault,
but
am I right,
everybody
brother?
has their own idea for what role a god or gods should play in the mortal world. Whether that's on an imperceptibly vast scale or deeply ingrained in day-to-day life, whether that god has a wide theological purview or is focused on being the singular patron for a select group of people. There's an uncountably infinite variety to the experiences people have with the concept of divinity. But surely there must have been a time when this question had a simple answer, right? Before the global exchange of culture presented us with hundreds of misaligned or outright incompatible concepts for our place in the world and potential worlds beyond, maybe if we wind the clock back to the earliest days of organized civilization, when the first cities rose above the floodplains of Mesopotamia, we might find a simpler time with a clearer answer. But
methinks this will be the old bait and switch.
that, dear viewer, is also a deceptively simple notion, because if you've poked your head around the beautiful mess of a tapestry that is human history, you'll know that is not at all how these things go. So bearing in mind that we can never find the answer to how cultures FaceTime their gods, we can look into the Sumerian Bronze Age to perhaps arrive at an answer. And that line of questioning takes us to the grandest physical remnant of their religion, the Ziggurat. A massive temple composed of layered terraces rising to a single point and towering over...
Sorry, I just realized I didn't have my microphone close enough to me, so hopefully you don't notice that much of a difference.
Everything else in the city. The name comes from the Akkadian word for pinnacle or high place and looks like a man-made mountain sprung right out of a dense urban environment. Now, the historical development of these buildings was a roughly 3,000-year process, reaching back from the earliest cities in human history and later becoming a key architectural presence across Mesopotamia. But to keep us focused, we're going to zoom into the greatest surviving ziggurat at the city of Ur.
Okay, so wait a second. I'm looking at this, and how were they constructed? Were they basically just stone walls filled with dirt? Or is that just like remnants from like centuries and centuries of decay? Because, I mean, I'm thinking of the Egyptian pyramids, the great ones. Because I know that those are like stone all the way through, but I also know that the later ones, when, you know, Egypt was poor after being bankrupt from building those pyramids, they were either just made out of literal mud brick instead of like stone, or they were like stone around dirt. So I think there's a couple of them you can see where they're like just piles now because they've kind of disintegrated over time.
So, to investigate the question of how Mesopotamian ziggurats brought them closer to their gods and see what that tells us about their society at large, let's do some history. The OG ziggurat in Mesopotamia is likely the Anu ziggurat in one of the earliest cities, Uruk. How old it is may depend on which chronology system you subscribe to, because historical dates before the 1500s BC lack solid time points we can definitively anchor to, so scholars operate on one of 5 distinct time scales with a spread of 150 years between the ultra-low and long chronologies. So bear in mind that every date I give in this video is wrong, and I'm not sorry because it's not my fault. Now, sometime in the high 3000s BC, Uruk built a raised platform out of mud bricks in the city to hold a shrine, and by the late 3000s BC they had added the White Temple on top as a more permanent fixture. Each work would have taken 1,000 laborers several years to build, but the effect is striking as the Ziggurat raises the temple above the sightline of the city walls, making this admittedly modest two-story religious site into the defining landmark of the city, announcing not just their majesty and skill, but also their piety. And this mound structure became the go-to for Near Eastern architecture, later appearing in other Mesopotamian cities over the next several centuries, as well as seeing use as burial grounds over in Egypt. These trapezoidy-looking mastaba tombs served as personal funerary ziggurats for the very first Egyptian kings from the turn of the 3rd millennium into the 2000s BC.
Oh, I think he's going to be just talking about this, but that actually reminded me that these actually, so thinking about it, those actually, they were actually like predated the pyramids, because it's starting to come back from a documentary on National Geographic I watched years ago before they went bad. But yeah, so like the pyramids they started with like the ziggurat for burial, and then it went on where, oh, I want mine taller, so we'll put several of them on top of each other, making the stepped pyramid, and then later on, that's when they made the straight pyramids afterwards. Though I think there was also that one that forgetting where it was or what was its name was, but it was the one where they were actually building it too steep, and they figured out halfway, and they figured like halfway that they weren't going to be able to finish building it at its current angle. So halfway it changes angle, it becomes a lot less steep. So it's oh God, what I need to remember, what is this name? The bent pyramid. That was, I mean, okay. Yeah, so the bent so if you look, the bent pyramid is literally, it changes angle, like, what is that, like, is this a, no, yeah, so it changes angle halfway through. And it's stuff like this where, like, you look at it and you have these people that say, like, oh, the ancient Egyptians could have never built this stuff. It's like, no. And you look at this and say, dude, they didn't get it right the first time. Actually, wait a second, is this older or newer? Now I'm second guessing myself. Is this older or newer than the Great Pyramids? So wait, Great Pyramid was approximately 2560 BC, and the Bent Pyramid 2600 BC. So yeah, that's about 70 years. Okay, so I was right. I wasn't like, yeah. So I was right.
King Djoser stacked them up in a step pyramid, and later kings smoothed the sides into the pyramids we recognize today.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea of stacking up the platforms will be a big deal later on.
Oh, wait a second, wait. I think, yeah, this is the one that I was talking about where it was like made out of dirt. So like, I think the center is made out of stone, but then the outside was basically covered in dirt, and then it was covered with the stones to make it look like a pyramid. But it's collapsed with age
today. But that key idea of stacking up the platforms will be a big deal later on. Back in Mesopotamia, these ziggurats weren't reserved for dead royals, but instead served as a sanctuary for a patron deity's statue, and thus was their earthly dwelling. And not just anybody can roll up to a divine residence, so the shrine atop a ziggurat was largely reserved for royalty and the high priesthood. These were not spaces of public worship that people gathered on, rather people conglomerated below in the area and courtyards surrounding the ziggurat for big festivals or holy days.
Okay.
Goes on the big bricky trapezoid. Now, after a millennium of early ziggurat building in Mesopotamia, the architecture gets serious during the 3rd dynasty of Ur with far more and far bigger structures. For the absolute bare minimum amount of context I can give without diverting completely from my stated goal of gushing about pretty buildings, early Sumerian history was a game of city-states with independent cities interacting via the network of waterways between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Around 2300 BC, King Sargon swept in from the north to conquer the whole of Mesopotamia and establish the Akkadian Empire. A century later, that dynasty collapsed from a mix of factors, but the historical record pins the blame on the Gutian people from the mountains in the east. Whomsoever the exact culprit may have been, the land was loosely ruled by the Gutians until the Sumerian restoration of 2112, according to the middle chronology, so give or take 50 years. After a final victory by Utu-Hagal against the Gutian king, as recounted in later Sumerian poetry, King Ur-Nammu re-established a royal dynasty in Ur, now with imperial control of Lower Mesopotamia, and all of it later on. Politically, this threw back to the days of the Akkadian Empire, but culturally it was a return to the Sumerian language's primacy in this multilingual civilization. And socially, this 3rd dynasty of Ur innovated in their own right by going absolutely insano mode in coordinating the state and the economy. The Ur III period, as it's known by historians, came onto the scene with the most robust system of social organization the world had ever seen. On a this entire video, the name Ur has been bugging me because
because it reminded me of something and I couldn't remember what, but I just remembered it. The Royal Game of It's like an ancient board game. Basically, the way you play it is each player starts sides, and you have like these little like dice-like things, and you roll, and you basically move pieces up from your starting spaces here onto the central thing, and you can almost think of it. It has similar rules to Sorry, where I think, with the exception of the flowers, if you land on one of these like normal spaces and your opponent lands on top of them, they move your piece back to your hand, and you win by moving all your pieces from over here to over here. The thing is, I've actually played this because you can find this game online, either playing against somebody else or playing against a computer. It is so weird, but it is actually, it's weirdly addicting. It's really funny how something like this can be just as addicting as like modern games. Oh, that'd be a good community play date. Back to the actual reaction.
Scale and thoroughness that few pre-modern civilizations could match. Every worker's production and payment was tracked and logged by an army of scribes, with records collated every month into a master list of input and output, and everyone's surplus or deficits carried year to year. They had to build an entire treasury city at Pujrishdagan just to manage all the inflows and outflows of goods. The kings of war delegated authority to provincial governors, so each city still had autonomy, but everyone operated on the same economic system, and the whole bureaucracy was trained to the same scribal standard. Likewise, the weight of currencies was standardized across the empire, so everyone's shekels and mina matched up, and every city followed the same legal framework 3 centuries before Hammurabi's famous law code showed up. Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi presided over one of the most dramatic leaps in human organization in ancient history, so compared against all of that, the otherwise astonishing effort of raising massive ziggurats in every major city almost seems casual. Of course, casual this was not, because the Great Ziggurat of Ur is Mesopotamia's architectural masterwork. Innovating from earlier one-layer designs, this ziggurat rises in 3 stacked terraces with a shrine for the moon god Nana at the top, and was built entirely of mud brick with an outer layer of sturdy fired bricks, likely painted and possibly glazed. 3 processional staircases rise to the first terrace, meeting in the middle and continuing up to the shrine. The play of straight lines and diagonals let the structure feel massive, while also conveying a clear upward movement with a literal arrow pointing up. The builders also used an optical trick called entasis, where every major surface on the ziggurat is slightly curved outward to sell the image of sturdiness. This was most famously used 1500 years later in the Athenian Parthenon, but Sumer got to it first. And finally, there's a pleasing
that is absolutely nuts. They're using optical illusions to, again, I cannot stand people who like talk about ancient aliens or stuff like that, because they're essentially saying, oh, ancient peoples were idiots. It's stuff like this. They were smart. They may have not had our knowledge, but I mean, we don't have a lot of their knowledge either. Everything is built on top of our predecessors. That's what actually, everything is on the shoulders of giants. It's giants all the way down.
Balance between the rigid geometric buttressing in the brickwork and the natural greenery adorning each terrace. The combined effect is a structure that unifies the divine scale with the human scale. It's a full-on mountain inside of a city that elevates the sacred space above the rest of the world, but it's perfectly traversable, bringing a king or high priest up to a convergence point with divinity. The terraces taper upward to the very top, where the priesthood and royals ascend, making their interaction with the gods the focal point of the whole structure, and by extension, the whole city. Now, various theories abound for what exactly happened in the shrine, but one especially saucy notion recounted by Herodotus claims it held a sacred bedchamber for a divine marriage ceremony between the deity and the city, enthusiastically larped by their metaphorical stand-ins, the high priestess and the king. Is that true? Well, it is Herodotus, but there is also a basis for it, and if we clean up that image a little bit, it points us towards a very personal relationship between the living semi-divine king and the deities above, facilitated by a monumental building effort and a powerful theocratic administration. Rising above the flat floodplains of Mesopotamia, a ziggurat like the one at Ur announces the city's presence and the living greatness of the king across vast distances. It's a truly spectacular feat and a testament to the organizational power of Ur III in addition to their artistic chops. Though the dynasty of Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi wouldn't stay in charge of Mesopotamia for more than a century, this architecture so emblematic of their reign continued to shape the Sumerian religious experience. So, how did the kings of Ur interact with their gods? With an absolute assload of bricks.
Okay. I was also going to say they had, like, they literally slept with them, but yeah, a lot of bricks, yeah.
And maybe a mop.
I shouldn't have paused.
It's fine. Thank you for watching. That last line is going into the rare but esteemed bank of I should probably gargle some acetone to clean that joke out of my mouth, but I hope you enjoyed the architecture stuff because I sure did.
Again, stuff like this. The ancients were not stupid. They may have been, the way I've always thought of it is they were not stupid, they were just not knowledgeable in certain aspects. Like, even if you gave them an entire lifetime, I don't think if you brought somebody from back then and you tried to teach them how a computer worked, I think their head would literally explode because, you know, they didn't know anything about atoms or electrons or all that sort of stuff, or maybe even like silicon in general, but they were not stupid. But yeah, I always gotta love stuff like this. It's beautiful. That'll be it for now. So, originals linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner card will be linking to my newest episode of Hearts of Iron 4. Hope you check that out, because me and Koth have been having a lot of fun playing that. And hopefully we'll move on to Stellaris afterwards. And yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.